Right, I think I'm recording now. Yeah, I'm recording. Yeah, so we'd like to record this. I won't share it with anybody unless until I've had express permission from you, but a couple of people who couldn't make it, like John McDonald, was keen to see it. So I will ask you afterwards if you can possibly edit stuff out, because I would like to be an open discussion, but happy to edit stuff out if you don't want anything shared. Yeah, so first of all, just I guess really keen for brief introductions. Let's keep this to sort of between 30 seconds and a minute. If we can just perhaps go around the room and introduce ourselves. I will start. Most of you know me, but not all of you. So been in tech all my career. A big chunk of it has been spent kind of with one foot exploring new tech in quite a hands-on way. I'm sort of a closet nerd, whilst the other foot focusing on sort of interacting with senior management teams and board members and even politicians to try and explain to them and make it a little bit more real. So I've sort of done a lot of that. Founded a company called 3months.com, which evolved into Blockchain Labs. Executive director of the Blockchain Association for about a year and a half. I co-authored a report, New Zealand Unlocking Blockchain Potential, a few years ago. I presented the Science Innovation Select Committee last year. I've been a trainer at Tech Futures Lab, part of Singularity University local training faculty in New Zealand. Last year I ran the first university course in the world on decentralized autonomous organizations at Vic, and been written about and featured in many articles in the press in this world. And sort of most recently been part of a few international DAOs, and we'll talk about DAOs in a minute, DAO Stack and Metacartel with James. And yeah, so I've been very much involved in that community. Right, James, you want to go next?
Yep. So hey guys, I think again, probably hopefully most of you recognize me, and for those that I don't recognize, hi, I'm James. I'm one of the core drivers of this initiative alongside Mark. Over the past 3 years, I've basically spent all of my time internationally traveling, sort of attending events at the intersection of, governance, economics, and technology. And sort of, I would identify, I guess, as a philosopher, sort of combining some of those ideas and then translating that to, human speak for businesses, and then, doing a bunch of research in other areas. So a bunch of that research has been spent sort of in this DAO space. And again, I'm sure we'll go into that a little bit more today. And I sort of am leading Metacartel, which is a DAO right now that manages about $250,000 New Zealand dollars. And what we do is we give out grants, and giving out grants is one side of it, but the other side of it is actually the mentorship and the direction, working with these small teams, working with these university students. How do we help them sort of, go down a creative and innovative path without maybe relying on the traditional, corporate governance or corporate fundraising that a lot of companies sort of generally default to? How do we do new creative ways to empower young sort of tech teams, not young, any tech teams. And I've sort of really personally seen the empowerment of these teams, watching over the past 12 months and a couple of these sort of digital first online DAOs, watching them grow from sort of tens of members to thousands of members in the past 12 months. And what I'm really excited to do is sort of bring back some of this, international crazy technology, magic happening, and sort of pull it into New Zealand to make that impact. So yeah, it's a little bit of context from me. Who's next? Doc, you want to go first? Next.
Thank you. So I am an applied anthropologist, and I don't know if you are familiar with anthropologists, but we're crazy people who go and live in the fields that we study. So kind of like social and cultural stalkers. You meet us, next minute we're living in your house and pretending we're one of your family. And at the moment, my field is the Institutes of Technology and Polytechnic in New Zealand, and helping them to go through the reform of vocational education. So I work most closely with UCOL, but have secondments outside of UCOL as well. I work with Teal structures, and that's outside of UCOL as well, with health networking, working with hospitals, with DHBs, and with healthcare providers in the community to find new ways to optimise the accessibility to healthcare, and also the autonomy of the patient in the healthcare environment by raising their awareness of their rights and also of their health and well-being, and how they can address those elements themselves without being reliant on a patriarchal structure. So I also work as a director with Infometrics and worked with them in the development of their online databases. And I've worked in technology for about 30 odd years. I started with smart slicing systems, which are large meat slicing systems that I exported all around the world that had onboard logic, robotics, infrared systems for health and safety. So yeah, I've always had a love of the technological space. My areas of specialisation are psychology of the individual in the social environment and the working environment, innovation and how it occurs, how that revolves or evolves into economic development and change, and what the social and cultural impacts of that change then are. And amongst all of that, what stops it happening. So that's me.
I'll pass it on to somebody else.
Oh, okay, Malcolm.
Guys, Malcolm Rands. Probably I'm most famous for as the founder of EcoStore, but EcoStore was set up in '93 as a social enterprise to fund a foundation. Right from the day go, it was just a fundraising idea, believe it or not. And what is relevant to this group is right back in the early '80s, '83, I was part of a community arts not-for-profit group, which were right into facilitated meetings and just the stuff that's come around now. We were doing in the early '80s, and then in '86 I helped form New Zealand's first permaculture eco village. And believe it or not, we've actually since '86 we've never not had a consensus decision, a decision that hasn't been consensus. And so we've managed to do that for 35 years, made every decision in consensus. So I'm really interested in how communities work together. And the foundations, one of the foundations projects we're doing at the moment is to bring the village into the city. It's called Bump Space, and it's talking about how we can develop real neighbourhoods in the city where people think they belong.
Pass on to somebody, Malcolm.
Oh, I can't see everyone. You have to do it.
Okay, Jacqui and baby.
I'm Jacqui. This is Orla. This is Welcome to Work Life. I'm a clinical psychologist. For the past 5 years before I had Orla, I managed Umbrella Wellbeing Limited, which is the organisational corporate wellbeing company. I then had a baby and thought I was going to go on parental leave, and then COVID-19 happened. I very swiftly exited parental leave. So I spend my time working with a small handful of private clients now, generally working with boards and ELTs around mental health and wellbeing in organisations, strategy design, and I've been delivering sessions over Zoom during this time, but I'm most probably known for the work I do in the media here, both interviews on telly, written media, and I've just started a podcast, as James was saying. So my passion really is science communication. I'm a non-closet geek, I'm a total geek, and I like to translate really psychological theory into practical strategies to help people live the best life that they can, in between changing nappies and putting babies to sleep.
Oh, do you want to pass it on?
Vic.
Good morning, everyone. Vic Crone. I'm the Chief Executive of Callaghan Innovation. So I've worked in technology and innovation for kind of far too long now, 20 years or something, 25 years. And my interest was initially in the impact of technology on consumers and how it changes the way that we live our lives and work. And then over the years, I've kind of worked across a range of corporate and startups. And now I'm in government, quite the shock. And it's kind of morphed into how New Zealand can get on the front foot in regards to the opportunities that that technology and innovation bring to how we live, work and play. And when you look at things like the living standards, there is a massive opportunity for technology to improve the way that we are living, and there's just so many examples out there like Manaikalani, etc., where technology has made such a difference to our vulnerable people. So my passion is that New Zealand doesn't get left behind, that we are aware of that we understand the ability for technology to impact, and then wanting to connect and work with others. one of the other big observations for me is that our governance models are well outdated, and I've sat around a few boardrooms, and particularly our corporate governance is incredibly old world, and I think is letting us down in regards to how we are able to migrate and see our companies move into this new space and a new way of operating. So governance is holding back our organisations in many instances. So I'm very curious about what we're talking about today. I firmly believe that new business models are needed, and so thank you for inviting me into this. So how about I hand over to Duane.
Kia ora, yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me in. My name is Duane Mutu. Look, I've worked with a lot of brands over the years, and then I migrated. Most people know me from my gaming background. So I founded Let's Play Live, which is the largest esports media business in New Zealand, one of the biggest in Oceania. And I'm also a founding member of the New Zealand Esport Federation. And so whether you like gaming or not, that's historic because it was just recognised after a 5-year journey to be a recognised national sporting organisation, which is just phenomenal, right? Like, I mean, that's historic. You never ever create a new sport, so to speak, and whether it's a sport or not, that's another conversation for another day. So certainly most people know me from that realm, but also have very deep ties to other parts of the media. So I've been in front of the media as far as a presenter and a host. I still do commentary for surfing around the place, but equally I work with the traditional medias too. So I like the understanding of new media and media in general. So having linear, if you think about linear, you think about new media like Twitch and YouTube, and then what really excites me about gaming, and obviously hopefully what I can bring to this group, and again appreciate being involved, is the fact that gaming will and is shaping actually a lot of what we're seeing here. You know, to Vic's point about the way in which we're interacting in communities, gaming, whether you like it or not, is actually already here. You know, we think about kids at school, we think about the metaverse, which is what we saw with Fortnite, and the way that they're dropping new bands, the way we interact across. So I think it's really important to understand gaming even at that level, and then and hopefully I can have that insight. So again, thank you.
Cheryl, do you want to go next? Last but not least.
Yeah, sorry, Cheryl. Lucky last.
Hey, yeah, kia ora, Cheryl Doig. I'm in Christchurch, Aotearoa. I have a company called Think Beyond, and I work as a leadership futurist, interested in strategic foresight. Poke my nose into a whole lot of different things in governance roles, been involved in 3 school startups over the years, and Brain Research Institute here in Christchurch. Really interested in the space of the future of learning. Run 2 conferences in Christchurch on that focus, and look at the future of learning as being key, and the future of work as being a subset of that. A lot of my work is in education, but not just, and I'm really interested in that space of innovation, complexity, non-linear change, and the role of technologies in that space. So I'm on a trust called Learning City Christchurch, Ako Tatahi, which is really focused on trying to bring all the diversity and move people out of silos to create a city that's really a learning ecosystem. So for me, I think in networks, and the work that you've all talked about makes complete sense to me.
Cool, thank you everybody. Okay, what I'll do now, I was going to do a wee check-in and really just more to illustrate the sort of the concepts, the sort of Teal concepts that some of you may be familiar with around wholeness at work, and not having this sort of this mask that we bring when we go to a work meeting. I think in the interest of time, we'll skip this because it would mean going all around the room, but normally we would do this to sort of bring some humanness to the conversation, but we'll just jump on in because I've got quite a lot to say. Okay, so I'll talk for a little while and then we can have a discussion afterwards, and as I said, it's probably best to keep questions to the end, but sort of jot them down as we go if stuff doesn't make sense or you disagree. But first of all, I just want to give some context to this, and Vic, apologise that some of this we talked to you about the other day, but sort of I'll repeat some of it, but some of it is new. So the virus impacts, we've seen this fascinating jolt to our lives and the economy, with the immediate impacts of essentially the capitalist system kind of got put on hold for a few weeks. And this had some immediate effects on our work and our life, specifically increasing unemployment, shift to remote working, shift to online only businesses, and the shift from physical communities to online communities. But it's also given rise to some sort of more dialogue, some more oxygen to some of these bigger meta issues. You know, one of the ones is the sort of the current systems are showing cracks. The current systems we have in place for coordinating human activity with the 200 sovereign states, deeply hierarchical systems, capitalism itself, simply start to not work very well when we're confronted with these global problems like pandemics or the tragedy of the commons, problems that are causing the environmental crisis. So that's one key thing. Another sort of issue which has been surfaced is too many businesses and too many industries, especially in New Zealand, are too fragile. And yeah, and the governments are running out of ways to absorb these shocks. There's also been increasing, so the government's kind of kicking the can further down the road in many ways. We've got the future of work is also being discussed more, and essentially a lot of people have been given a kind of a UBI, universal basic income, recently, and that's actually enabled them to pursue some other non-economic activities, such as looking after family and doing other things. So we've had this sort of interesting thing happen, and of course the impacts on our mental health, which has been going on for many years. There's been that discussion, and the stats are showing it's getting worse, and certainly the virus has sort of accelerated that problem. This book I definitely recommend, and I'm very wary that we've got a trained psychologist in the call. So, but you know, very much recommend this book. And it's the guts of it is that we are getting more anxious and depressed. And this book kind of strongly supports the idea that anxiety and depression are not, in fact, a brain malfunction where our serotonin is too low, but it's actually predominantly caused by environmental factors. We're simply living in a world that we weren't designed to live in, and a lot of these problems are caused by these things. One of it is disconnection from meaningful work, and meaningful work is mostly about having control and autonomy of our work. Disconnection from other people. So we were evolved to be tribal, part of communities. Especially in the West, we've become the first humans to dismantle those tribes. But to address loneliness, you not only need other people, but you need to feel that you're sharing something with people or a group that is meaningful to both of you. You have to be in it together. That's what the science is saying. Disconnection from meaningful values. So we have intrinsic motivations, goals, values, so things that you do because you value them in of themselves, not because you're going to get anything from them. And then we have extrinsic motivations, things that you do because you get something in return, money, status, etc. So our entire culture is designed to encourage us to chase these extrinsic goals, but the problem is, of course, that the science is also telling us that these extrinsic goals don't make us happy. So the belief is that inside us, we've got these powerful desires to find meaningful intrinsic values, but it's not hard to distract us with junk values driven by the advertising industry and ultimately capitalism. Then there's disconnection from status and respect. This is the idea that we suffer when our status or respect is either challenged or simply perceived to be lower than everybody else. And this happens almost by design within our deeply hierarchical organizations, where there is this fight to get up to the next ladder, rung in the ladder. And we know that never before in history have we seen the gaps between the people who are earning at the top and the people at the bottom. But also traditional society, both media, traditional and social media, is giving us this constant message that other people are doing better. And we know that's getting worse and worse. Disconnection from the natural world. Really interesting. The scientists believe that part of the problem is that depression and anxiety is this process of becoming a prisoner in your own ego, your own thoughts, your own story. But when we're faced with the natural landscape, you get this feeling of awe that can put everything into perspective. Disconnection from hopeful or secure future. So the sense of a positive future protects you. If life is bad today, you can think this hurts, but it won't last forever. And it turns out that much of the security can be gained by achieving community control. A lot of really interesting insights around this of the Native American Indians in the book. So another part of the context story.
Psychologist in there, one sentence.
Yeah.
Because that book is brilliant, and there are wonderful things there connected to well-being and mental health, but it's really important we don't overlook endogenous depression, which does come from a chemical imbalance. And I think sometimes we have so much discussion on what we can do in our controllable, which is what that book is talking about, that sometimes that invalidates people's experiences where there really is a chemical imbalance. So that's my only caveat to that.
Thank you. I absolutely agree. So another part of the context story is that many people are starting to believe this increasing unhappiness is actually part of a wider societal shift. And instead of trying to go back to the good old days, we actually need to understand and accept and embrace this societal shift. And this is a fascinating book. It's sort of being written as a podcast by the author, which gives a great interview. But it kind of makes the point that this technological change is not simply an extension of the industrial age, where we're replacing our machines with faster, better ones, and that capital is a constraint. We're in fact moving from an industrial age to a knowledge age, where instead of capital being constraint, human attention is the constraint. And this shift is actually as fundamental a shift as the shift from the agrarian age to the industrial age. It's going to have huge, huge implications, and we need to understand that and start to adapt to it. And if we don't, we're going to get more into trouble. So organizational governance. So our current organizational governance systems are structures are still stuck in the industrial age. And as we move into the knowledge age, they're at best suboptimal and at worst dangerous, both to us as individuals, but also to the wider ecosystem that we live in. We are seeing increased wealth, status, power inequality. And this, I believe, is fundamentally built around the power hierarchy. The people at the top have power, control. People lower down are powerless and increasingly poorer. These systems, they don't optimize human potential and happiness. Your typically corporate community hierarchy essentially creates a competition to climb the ladder, and this actually has the effect of putting greater value on typically masculine traits in order to fight your way up that hierarchy, aggression, manipulation, and doesn't stress and value the more feminine traits such as compassion, collaboration, empathy. The other problem with hierarchy is that it creates inertia. So as organizations grow, they become less reactive, less able to adapt quickly to the changing world, become more ripe for disruption, and also environmentally extractive. By design, a lot of these systems are designed to extract value from the shared resources and pump them up into shareholder value, so which is not sustainable, as we're starting to see. So there is an alternative. For many years, there's been experimentation and some successful implementations of decentralized governance, with things like open source and Teal and Holacracy. That's been working away for many years, and collectives and all that sort of thing. More recently, I think, really interestingly, we've seen this world of blockchain and tokenization and token economics, which is this intersection between governance and game theory, and ultimately DAOs, so this concept of a decentralized autonomous organization. And this is my favorite definition: an open organization that aims to most efficiently achieve a set of purpose-driven goals through the use of independent agents driven by incentive mechanisms. So it's a very different way of thinking about an organization. By the way, Malcolm, I can share these slides. So we believe that we're now at a point where we can actually start to create and scale these non-hierarchical, purpose-driven, truly agile entities that can tap into the collective intelligence, passion of its participants, as opposed to the top-down command and control system that we have in place today. My experience and opinion is that this stuff is too radically different to try and sort of retrofit it to most traditional organizations. They will just reject this thinking. It's too hard. There's too much ego, too much power protection, too much risk involved. So we can't do that. But I do believe that we're at a point where we can and should start to experiment by creating these new entities in this new paradigm. So the experiment. Can we create a sustainable and scalable organization / community that has human happiness and agility baked into its DNA? So can we remove all the current traditional business organizational constraints, the best practice that we've kind of assumed are the only way to do these things? Can we embrace the new philosophies, the new practices? Can we make something that's truly agile, that has evolutionary purpose, is able to adapt quickly? And can we tap into collective intelligence of its participants and not assume that the people up the hierarchy know more or better making decisions? And can we rely on incentive mechanisms, as opposed to typically legally enforceable contracts, shareholder agreements, employment contracts, etc., to achieve its goals? So why NZ? Why would we want to start trying this in NZ? I think there's a few reasons that I can see. One is our Indigenous culture. We're in this unique situation in New Zealand where we do have strong links to our Indigenous culture. And in many ways, what we're trying to do is to apply some of those tribal values like collective ownership, supportive communities, connection with nature. We're trying to bring those into the 21st century. This headline about the Whanganui River getting legal identity, that's a groundbreaking thing that made international headlines. There's no other country, that, as far as I know, that have done that sort of thing. Our international brand of trust and integrity. This matters a lot if we want to sort of scale this and take this beyond our borders. Our close links between government and private sector. Again, this is pretty cool that we're able to get a room full of people from both sectors pretty easily. High trust network to get started. So much of what I'm proposing that we do does rely on high trust, respect, integrity between the individuals to get things going, as opposed to legal contracts. And I think the whole 2 degree of separation thing in New Zealand does, in my experience, make this thing a whole lot easier. Okay, the how. How might we do this in practice? So the idea is to sort of start from the top. Look at how do we actually create essentially a decentralized board, decentralized governance from that sort of top-down approach. So the idea is to bring together a small group of amazing people, and by amazing I would sort of define that as value-aligned, influential, diverse skills and experience, open-minded. Give them some incentives to actually invest their time, and those incentives are essentially, come and have the opportunity to learn and experiment, and potentially bring that learning out into your other businesses, your other worlds, but also the opportunity to be part of something that could be potentially quite big and impactful. So essentially kick off 2 streams of work, one around education, and bear in mind that a lot of these practices, principles are quite different from the traditional way businesses are run. So we need people who are open to learning and unlearning stuff. And then education part, and as I've run a university course on a lot of this stuff, so I'd essentially pull out the best bits, and we'd cover things like sort of Teal, Holacracy, token economic incentive structures, quadratic voting, token bonding curves, curation markets, shared fund management, vast smart contracts, etc. There's a whole bunch of things that we could all learn, but also experimentation. Actually start that off as well. And that would take the form of a summoner, somebody, an individual, that would be me, defining a starting point, sort of just good enough purpose, values, governance rules, inviting that small number of people to join under these rules, and essentially letting it go. And bear in mind, once that summoner, that individual has let it go, then that person loses control, that they don't have control anymore. They could be chucked out just like anybody else. So kind of the initial experiment, the question is, can we create a framework and incentive structure that holds these influential people together to create something of value, and then can it scale? And I would argue that if we get the right people and we can hold them together, by virtue that they're all influential in their own right, then we should have value sort of by default, because that entity has that sort of shared influence, which becomes quite a powerful force in itself, even doesn't do anything else. So all of this is still a bit abstract. What I want to do is next few slides is just to make it a little bit more real and touch on some of the sort of, quote, just good enough ideas, concepts that I believe that we could start us off in this experiment. And these are drawn from a number of areas of my own experience, and Teal and Holacracy and blockchain, just in a way that seems to make sense in this context of kind of a startup Teal entity. So kind of a few random things, and this is from Holacracy world, the idea that you don't have jobs, you have a series of roles, and the roles have purpose, accountabilities, domains, and that purpose is, each role purpose is aligned with the organizational purpose. A person can have multiple roles that typically align with their passions and skills, and they can move between those roles as their passions and skills change, and roles can be grouped into circles. That can in some cases represent a sort of traditional, you could have the marketing circle, for example, consisting of a bunch of people who are doing roles in that. But roles, one of the key things about roles is they're not fixed, they're not sort of stapled to a job description and put in the back drawer. They evolve almost weekly in response to tensions, which we'll talk about in a minute. Embracing uncertainty and agility. So this is a few of these concepts that have come through mostly from the agile thinking, but an agile and lean startup world, don't spend too much time trying to predict the unpredictable. Strategy is this organic process, the whole concept of just enough planning. Simplicity is important in our processes, in our tools, for the single reason that simple things are easier to change and undo if we want them more adaptable. We have this purpose as this guiding light, but then everybody becomes empowered to sense and act on what might be called for. We try stuff, we fix it, rather than spend too much time analyzing it. And in theory, the organization should grow. So it's that sort of value almost that's built into what we do. Tokenization. So this comes from the world of blockchain that me and James have been immersed in for many years. And it's this fascinating convergence of that sort of technological evolution with the other sort of Teal Holacracy worlds. But essentially, one of the key things about the blockchain world is it allows you to create these tokens, and these represent something of value. And a token and token economics is this sort of intersection of game theory and governance. But a token can have many faces. It can look a bit like an equity in a company. It can look like a financial instrument, a right, a currency. But the key thing is, in this context, it can look like equity in the business, or reputation, or a measure of contribution. But the key thing, so I'll put it in bold, is that it's programmable. So we can really make it anything we want. And the concept behind the blockchain, if you don't know that, is that once you put these rules, these pre-agreed rules onto a blockchain, then we don't have to trust a third party to execute those rules. It will execute as programmed, and that's quite a fundamental shift that opens up a whole new area. So what we can do is we can use these token economics to create incentive structures, essentially. And just to give you some hints and some ideas around what those incentive structures might look like, we could create something with no legal entity, certainly initially, and perhaps forever. Tokens could represent value in the entity. Tokens could be minted or earned, and these are just ideas. Tokens could be minted or earned by adding value to the entity, say investing some time, your own time, or your reputation, or your own dollars. Tokens could be burned when value is taken out of the business. Tokens could be, you could specify rules that say that only tokens could be owned and traded by people who contribute to the entity. If contributors stop contributing, then their tokens could be degraded by, say, 5% per month. That provides an incentive for people to sell their tokens back to people who are still contributing. No single person could hold over X% after the beginning. And perhaps as a navigation, I'll talk about navigation in a minute, you, as a decision maker, you must have at least Y percentage, for example. So in the absence of power control hierarchy, I think you do need other forms of hierarchy, and often these can look more like democracies with sort of elected decision makers. But initially in sort of startup mode, when there's high risk, high uncertainty, you don't actually have a community to vote anything anyway. I quite like this alternative approach where you create a hierarchy around commitment. So this also acknowledges that people have different and changing motivations, time available, interest in governance and decision and strategy anyway. So we kind of group it into 3 groups. One is navigators, and this looks a bit like the sort of senior management team or board in some ways. These people are committing some sort of minimum commitment, hours per month, say, and they make all the key decisions. These are kind of the root and the trunk decisions, not the leaf or the branch decisions, but the key decisions. And they can also, of course, contribute and earn tokens. And they're paid, and I put paid in inverted commas, but their effort is potentially represented in tokens for their contribution. Then we have contributors, and this can be anybody who adds value to the entity by contributing maybe time or whatever. They're also paid in tokens. And then we have service providers, and this is much more traditional. We just want to outsource something to get something done, and they're just paid in normal dollars. Another key concept is that we know from the science behind depression and anxiety that having control and autonomy over work is vital. In a hierarchical system, as I mentioned, where ownership and power control sits at the top, then almost by design, the work has to be pushed down. And companies have found plenty of ways to sort of mask that fact and give a perception of autonomy and control, but I would argue fundamentally it's not there. So in this decentralized work world experiments, work is pulled rather than pushed. So in practice, this is how it might work. So the navigator group defines high-level purpose value strategies. Anybody, the contributors or the navigators, can pull specific work by creating a proposal. They write down, hey, I think I can do this thing that adds value and gets us closer to that purpose. This thing aligns with my skills, my passions, and this is what I want in return. I want this many tokens, or I want this much money, or I want nothing. It's up to them what they propose. And a proposal is really anything that potentially adds value to the entity. And the navigator group essentially looks at all these proposals and says, okay, that's a good one. Yeah, we'll authorize that, or we're going to reject that, or we're going to ask for more information. So they control that sort of prioritization and authorization of proposals. Tensions, another key thing. So in the absence of hierarchy, tensions are a vital tool to help the entity react and evolve. So make it look more like an organism than an organization. And essentially something that can use all the components, the cells or people, to utilize its collective intelligence and react to external stimuli. So attention is a person's sense that there is a gap between current reality and potential future. So anybody can raise attention at any time. If it's part of their role domain, then they just address it. Attentions are processed weekly by the navigators, and generally attention results in either a modification to a role, a proposal to do a bit of work, a decision to change the foundation rules of the organization, or feedback to that person. Okay, so almost finished. So the idea is that this entity would be learning and experimenting in creating its own community, i.e. eating its own dog food. But what would its purpose be? What would its value to the world be? And this is kind of part of the experiment, that can you bring the right people together in the right conditions? Will that purpose sort of evolve and be defined? And will it sort of have its own legs? But of course, it's sometimes a chicken and egg situation is that it's easier to bring good people in if you do have some sort of clear and exciting purpose. So I guess, just to sort of get started, it's, I quite like the idea of a hierarchy of purpose, and increasing human happiness at the base, building better communities from New Zealand. and then a subset from that, creating a powerful best practice decentralized governance entity. This could be a starting point for discussion within navigators. So this entity could potentially be a catalyst to potentially help create, support, mold other value-aligned communities, and it could achieve these goals in many ways. It could provide knowledge, support, training. It could provide funding. It could just provide signaling. Again, if this entity consists of these powerful, influential people, then simply a signal from this entity that this project is worth pursuing could be a very, very powerful thing. So I'm just going to hand over to James now to just talk about, so again, some of the other ideas and things that might fit into this, and then we can have a discussion.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think that paints a really great picture from Mark sort of talking about some of that high level stuff. I think from my perspective, as someone who's sort of been this international citizen, I guess, and really digital first, this feels like a real alignment of the stars in terms of timing. Right, we're all being forced online for everything from work to pleasure. For during COVID. This is the first real test case of the internet, right? It was invented 20 years ago, and now we're sort of really being forced into it. And at the same time as all that's been happening, there's been these new sort of digital blockchain, deeply technical projects that have started up at the same time. And I think what's really interesting is how do we combine these two things, right? How do we combine, New Zealand being such an aligned nation with this new digital innovation? I think a really good way to illustrate that is with Hack the Crisis. So for those that don't know, I know a number of people here are actually involved in it as well. Hack the Crisis was sort of an initiative about a month ago in New Zealand. It was sort of an online ideathon, hackathon over a weekend. So, people came and joined, said, hi, I have these skills. Other New Zealanders put up proposals and said, hey, this is what we want to achieve. They then formed teams around it and looked to execute on some of those things. Now, there was a bunch of good initiatives that came out of that, but one of the most interesting from my perspective was just the number of people. So there was 1,000 people that came and joined that group. And, we're listing their skills from academia, business, government, all the different ways they can add value. And I think actually, being in New Zealand and seeing how sort of aligned the nation is, just making an online platform where sort of any New Zealander can come and propose a cool idea, and then any other New Zealander or group of New Zealanders can sort of come and collaborate around that idea. That's really what I think, could be one of the outcomes of this experiment that would be really exciting is, how do we sort of build this ongoing digital empowerment platform for innovators of New Zealand to sort of support one another, connect, and build these interesting outcomes. And certainly from a much more technical land, these things are really happening. And I think it's super exciting, given the current situation globally, for New Zealand to be able to leverage some of these cool innovations.
Cool, thank you, James. Right, so so we have got about 10-15 minutes. Love any initial feedback, questions, areas that you're just confused about, or very happy to, me and James, to answer any questions. You'll have to unmute yourself if you do want to speak. Feedback? Is it, am I completely crazy?
No, you're not completely crazy. I think that this kind of structure works really well when you've got a really clear area of focus, and I can see how you are looking at the transactional component of it through the tokenization. My concern would be twofold. One of them is that you've dropped back in part of your presentation to the language of the feudal structure, which is the hierarchy, senior leadership team, the kind of navigator / chief executive / chief executioner. You can call them whatever they like, but they're still the same. And I just put a little bit of a caution on that if you want to move to scalability of something that is actually different from the current structures, and longevity as well, because one of the strengths of the feudal system is that it has longevity, and one of the weaknesses of the new network system is that networks are too easily burned. So that's just a challenge for you in terms of dropping back into that language could be constraining for what you want to achieve. On the other side of it, I think that being really clear about incentives. This is the economist speaking in me here, and the psychologist from the intrinsic extrinsic perspective. People have a tendency to show bias, to value their own work higher than that of another, to value the work of someone they like more than they value the work of someone they don't like, to value a task that they don't like doing at a lower rate than they do a task that they do like doing and have a competency for. There's all sorts of red flags that are raised around tokenization or monetization. And so making sure that the incentives match to a network structure and that there is a real understanding of the true value of contribution. You know, take the rubbish trucks away and see what life looks like, but they're not paid very much. So it's just thinking about those elements of it. In terms of the structure, just going back and matching the structure to incentive, it won't take long in any network structure before ego raises its head.
Yep.
When success begins to manifest, whether it's monetized success or monetized success, egos tend to step forward and attempt to capture. That's an insight for me in terms of the organisational studies I do, because all of the villages I inhabit are organisations. And in our contemporary Western society, which is profoundly narcissistic compared to societal frameworks of the past, it doesn't take long for ego to step up, and it can become quite violent in the destruction of the network. So those are the kinds of critical elements of it. Apart from that, I would say that I think it's a really exciting initiative. And I think if we can openly hold those kind of, what do they call them, Nike's butt-face conversations about issues like that, I think you could really take it forward and get some value out of it.
Yeah, Doc, I absolutely agree. And yeah, and I think, the experiment would be, can we sort of fend off those negative ego-driven trends that absolutely are going to be there? Can we sort of build that into its DNA so it doesn't take off or get hold? And yeah, I don't know the answer. My hope is that there are ways to do that. And I think the other point I'd make is that the sort of structure I propose, where we do have this sort of navigator team, I see it as a sort of stepping stone to, kind of, you need sometimes a different structure when you're in a startup mode, just to sort of get it off the ground. And the hope is, it would evolve into something potentially quite different. So yeah, it was just, I couldn't think of other ways to sort of quickly and easily get going and get moving. But yeah, absolutely agree that you need to be careful that it doesn't turn out badly. That
it doesn't reify and become a solid structure. And I think it's just overcoming the cultural impetus that underlies all of us, acknowledging it and getting open about how you move beyond it. That's all I'll say, because someone else has got something to say.
Yeah. Just to add on to that, I think in terms of the scalability of it, certainly from my perspective, I think aspirationally here is sort of, as the thing scales, that we're talking about here, we can build it into something where sort of any New Zealander can join this group, right? It's sort of an open participation group, and sort of opening it up to the as wide a group as possible. It would be certainly one way to hopefully try and navigate that.
I'd say something about the startup phase, because the language and organisation of that will influence what happens in the later stages. And I love the idea that it is rooted in this place and the Indigenous culture. And so I guess my question as it moves forward is how what an influential person looks like and who gets to choose.
Yeah, and I think, again, I think it's valuable to differentiate between the sort of seeding, and I think the word sort of seeding or hatching is often used in other DAO communities. There is this phase where, we do need some different rules to give it the most chance of actually getting to critical mass. And yeah, I think that's the challenge in how we plan for that transition out of the hatching phase. And I don't think there's any easy answers, but yeah.
Can I speak from the psychological side? Because economics is totally new to me, and it's like new language. But from the psychological behaviour change, having a purpose around creating a happy, content, well New Zealand, I think a large part of that is around psychoeducation. So people take things on board and work hard when they understand why it's important. But on the other side, from working with organisations, I don't think New Zealanders like to feel like they don't already know in the first place. So you have this hard bridge between the importance of psychoeducation but we already know it and we've already tried it, or it doesn't work, or this is the way we do it. So having some way of like the learnings you were talking about, Mark, having an accessible way of psychoeducating about what elements are important and how they might benefit ourselves and other people would be really useful.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I've got a difficult question for you, Mark.
Yep. I like you, Malcolm.
I love what you're doing. I think it's brilliant, and I can just see so much power here and brilliant. Before I get involved, what I always like to know is, you're giving us a sell, great. You and James, what are your fears around this project? What are you worried about not going to work? I'm interested in that as well.
Fears. My fear is that. My initial fear is that I can't convince enough of the right people to get off the ground, to help me get off the ground, because I can't do it on my own. That's one fear. I guess the other fear is, it goes off in a direction that I hadn't anticipated, and that's because I'm not controlling this thing once I let go on day 2, so it could morph into something that's I create a Frankenstein. That's I think there's a small chance, but a possible chance. James, you got anything to add?
Well, I mean, I'll be blatantly honest. I think one of mine is that all of my work is sort of done in this DAO, space, but not in the New Zealand space, not in the traditional space. And I'm sort of used to this being able to, generally surrounded by people who age from, 15 to 35, who are sitting at a computer for 12 hours a day doing this stuff. And, that allows for a lot of, action. And I think one of my concerns is that I sort of stand here yelling in the corner going, we should do this, we should do that. And that sort of gets swept by because of the sort of general underlying, theme or thoughts of some of the group. That would be one of mine. But I think that is, through communication is something that we can definitely move past.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
I wondered if an area to shift focus away from what James is saying and what others are saying, and myself, in terms of letting go of the past and letting go of the structural and hierarchical frameworks of the past, is taking us from the I am statement, I am a navigator, I am an anthropologist, I am a chief executive, to what I bring or what I offer. And I think that's really where your networking, really the rubber hits the road, because then when James brings forward an idea and says, I would like to achieve and I bring, his call is not for chief executives and influencers or any other kind of hierarchical value statement. Rather, he's saying, who has the skills to come with me? What do you bring? And I think that's a really critical de-egoization, because it asks people what their skills are and what they bring, absent of the conversation of their status or their label. And I think that's really important. I learned this lesson from a cleaner called Malia, and she was a wonderful person. I was chief executive at Bill when I met her, and in her paid job at $12 an hour, she was a cleaner. But Malia was the wife of a minister and a Matai in the Samoan church, and her role in life was to counsel, be a wise woman, and heal her community. So what she brought was entirely independent of her role, and that's what you're telling us. So I think that's one of the things that come out from the butt-face conversations between the people who come together first of all, is that letting go of the ego and finding those ways to say, how do we bring people in absent of their status and their role, but bringing in their competency and their passion and their energy. So is that one of the ways we could do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
I mean, there's a lot to digest in a general sense. So I will just say that I think, there is an element of almost been there but not quite, because I think the hierarchical piece and, you know, exactly what's being said here is the reality of you're still putting people in charge at some level of it, right? So you have, you know, by the way you're going through, you're going, well, these people will sit up here and the next person's there and the next person. But obviously as a vision, you're trying to get away from it. So what I'd take as an example, and this might be hard for some people to understand, is look at it. Are people familiar with the game Fortnite or an open world simulation? Okay, so what's really fantastic about it is think about it more like you have an open world situation and everything within that world is somewhat cosmetic, okay? So like whether I'm playing as a turtle and you're playing as a shark or whatever, it's just cosmetic, it's look and feel. But what it's fantastic at is it's given you a framework of rules. So within that playing rules, there's only so much you can do, right? You know, you can all jump out there, but someone has set those rules. And so when I think about something like this really working, it's about actually setting up a complete set of rules. It's like a rule book that sits, and it is like before you let it go, and in some ways you're kind of mastering it, but you create the actual framework in a circular way. So it's an open world. So there are rules that exist in that world, but they're not rules like me and you would expect, like as in a hierarchy, or you have to be here from 4 to 5 or whatever. It's like I said, you can do what you want within the ecosystem, but the ecosystem is still built. And so that way you would have, again, to your point, ego is not really a problem because some people can do this, they can do that, but really the framework is there. So it's not really about people, it's about actually the space you create. And therefore, think of it again like it's hard to explain if you don't kind of understand what I'm talking about. Like a chat group, right? Like the chat group exists, you can put words and terminology in there, but anyone can put any messages in there, but you can't swear and you can't be racist, you can't do this and that, but you're able to play and experience in the way that you'd like to experience it. And that way you kind of lose a lot of it totally decentralizes everything, and then you just have a framework, is what I was trying to get to.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and I mean, and that's actually the sort of the philosophy around holacracy. You know, essentially, Brian Robertson, the author of that, and if you look at his presentations, it's very much that concept. You know, it's the way a city works, not in a hierarchical way. You define certain rules, but then you just let it evolve. And a city is, very different from a hierarchical organization. So it's a very different way of or in fact, an ant colony or a human body. They're fundamentally not hierarchical. They're decentralized. So it's kind of trying to model those worlds. And yes, I would stress again that this sort of pseudo hierarchy that I have proposed in the Navigator group. I see it as just a sort of a means to an end, because the reality is, to get something going, you do need some smart people. Typically a small number of smart people to sort of get round and make some decisions together. But after that, if you're value aligned and you can start to build up that rule base. If you're value aligned and you're educated enough in some of these new ways of thinking, then the hope is you can start to come up with these rules that could allow this thing to scale to sort of almost an unlimited level.
And certainly, just to add on to that, and certainly from the more sort of digital world that I'm coming from, the way these have worked so far is if you just show up to a random chat group and you have a better idea on how to run the thing or what should be done as a proposal, we will execute on it, right? And there is very little hierarchy from the person who set it up on day one to the person who's been contributing 100 hours this month to the person who just showed up and joined the first call. The idea of the meritocracy and purely ideas holding value has certainly been seen successful there. So yeah, I agree.
So Mark, I'm very supportive, and I really enjoyed the discussion in regards to the different perspectives on it. And for my own organisation, we are wanting to move into a fully agile little a organisation that has decentralised decision-making, communications, information. By the end of this year, and we think we'll be the first government agency globally to go fully agile. So all of this is really helpful, and the 3 areas of thinking that we're calling on to take us there is agile organisations or flexible organisations, decentralised organisations, and regenerative thinking. And so I'm super keen to kind of support, help wherever I can, because I do believe that our country and the world needs a new model. I agree with you, James. I think there's parts of the world that's way ahead of us, and we face an increasing disconnect between how our young people are operating and how our slightly older people. That's stereotyping highly. I've met some amazing people in their 60s and 70s who are able to move and flex. However, that's not the norm. And if I look at my organisation, there's a real disconnect in terms of how our kids are coming out of uni and wanting to work and the environments that they are landing in New Zealand. So I'm super supportive, both for my own organisation, but for the country.
Yeah. Okay, that's awesome, and really appreciate all that feedback. I guess just to try and wrap things up is sort of next steps. As I say, you know, I'm really keen to get this moving, but you know, I need other people, and I guess the way I saw the next steps were to potentially sort of contact you all individually, get some any other feedback, gauge your level of interest, your level of commitment, potential commitment. Also, if there are other people, again, I emailed a whole bunch of people, you know, to have this call, and you know, a subset responded, and yeah, there's a few people who couldn't make it today, who were very interested but couldn't make it today. I'm keen to share this video with them, and if you feel you know other people, my feeling is that to get it hatched, our biggest shot at making this happen is to find influential people. Because yeah, it will be so much easier then to scale it out from there, to get others involved then during the hatching phase. So really keen to potentially connect with other people who may fit this mold, this vision I've got for this initial hatching group. So you may have connections there, really like them, to meet them. Investigate any financial support options. Vic, you mentioned potential Callaghan money. Don't know, we haven't followed that up with Kevin yet, but keen to follow up that discussion. And yeah, and ultimately, if things go to plan, sort of create this initial hatching group or whatever we call it, and whether we need to sort of modify the language straight away, I'm totally open to that. But we sort of create this navigator group and start the experiment, start the education process, and go from there. It's gone. So yeah, so yeah, I guess yeah. So I will contact you all individually. And yeah, perhaps give yourself a chance to reflect on some of this. I'll send out the slides, a PDF of the slides just after this call. You need to look through them, but keen for sort of any further feedback, and yeah, and anything you can add later on. Okay, I think we'll call it a day. And you know,
very excited, everyone.
Thanks
thank you guys. Thanks
for making the time.
Great chat.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks to you two guys, James and Mark, for doing it now. I really appreciate it. It's
cool.
Well, it's a really exciting initiative.
Thanks, Malcolm.
Well done. Well done.
Cheers.
Good stuff.